I thought I would just start with now and just tell a story about what happened to me last night. So I'm here in Bristol. I'm not on my farm today, but my farm is 300 acres in West Wales. It's the longest established organic dairy farm in Wales now, because as you just said, as a hippie, I got back to the land from London in 1973 with a bunch of fellow communards. And the community farm did not last, although I am passionate about community farming still. It didn't last in the form that it was originally, but the farm is still going today. And we have a herd of dairy cows, native breed, that we milk to produce milk for raw milk cheese, which is made on the farm. And we are trying to follow the principles of the circular economy, obeying the law of return, minimizing our demands on outside income, inputs, raw materials, farming in harmony with nature. And my view about the future of civilization on planet Earth is that we farmers are ecosystem managers. We are part of the ecosystem. We are not separate from nature. We are part of nature. And we have to farm in a way which looks after the natural capital, the soil, the biodiversity, the human skills, everything in our ecosystem, but at the same time produce as much food as is possible without diminishing the balance sheet of nature. And throughout the whole of my farming lifetime, which is now nearly 50 years on the farm, we have witnessed an extractive agriculture, which has treated the balance of nature, the capital, as if it was income. And we are now at a critical level where the soil carbon has gone into the atmosphere, the fertility is reduced, the food is industrial and nutrient poor, and we are in the second generation of a global feeding trial, especially in the Western nations, where we industrialize farming, process the food, feed it to an entire population and see what happens without a control. And the best control is America, where I think you can see, I think we are close behind in the United Kingdom, but if you want to look at the effect of poor food on the psychology and the physical health of a population, go to America or go to the UK, and you will see the effect on public health and mental health. And it's not good. And everyone knows this now. And it's interesting that just this week, there was a CEO discussion with Nestle, who have announced that they're going to transition to regenerative agriculture. And you would think that they would have a clear plan and they know exactly what they're going to do. They don't, which is really rather inspiring. That the leaders, the CEO and the head of communications, both said, we have to learn from farmers. We don't even know what the route map is of the transition, but we have to change. And I think that is the mood now of people who understand how bad the situation is in agriculture globally, and what an enormous change is necessary. And I think that animals that know when the tsunami is coming, people know this. People know this, individual citizens know it, but big companies know it too. So I think a bit like the atmosphere that was around when I was a teenager in the late 60s, there was a consciousness shift that went on. And the consciousness shift that is going on amongst young people today is not the same as it was in the 60s, but it is related. At certain times in human history, I think people see that we have to imagine things that are not technically within our capacity to do, and do them anyway. And this is a really exciting moment in human history, and it's ironic and perhaps lawful that we see so much conflict in Afghanistan, in Syria, and we see so much nationalism, and we see so much greed and all the darker manifestations of human beings. And yet there is a counter movement, I think, of hope and of inspiration, and which has a spiritual root, which I believe is necessary if we are going to survive as the population of planet Earth in any form of civilized fashion. And when I was in London last night, I went up to the Chelsea Flower Show. I don't normally go there very often, but I was invited by a guy called Tim Mead, who owns a company called Valley, which is an organic yogurt company. And he formed a partnership with Arla, who are the largest dairy farming cooperative in the world. And so he's a businessman who built a big food company, and he's collaborating with this enormous dairy farming cooperative, which has got pretty industrial. But he has been very successful, and I've known him for a long, long time because I used to work at the Soil Association, which is the organic advocacy and certification organization in the UK for many years, 25 years or something like that. And now I've founded the Sustainable Food Trust, which I put the links to in the chat, because I felt that creating a separate organic market for people who could afford to spend more on food, some of whom thought it was better, some of whom thought it was just expensive, has to give way to something bigger and more inclusive than that. Because unless all the farmers of the world change to truly sustainable food and farming systems, we won't have a habitable planet. So I was talking to Tim last night, and he said, we now have a situation where more and more farmers know in their hearts that what they've been doing is wrong. And Arla told me that there was a queue of dairy farmers wanting to transition to organic production, but there aren't enough people buying the products to enable to give them a contract. And I thought that was really interesting because it suggests that, in a way, it's the individual citizen which is the most powerful agent of change on planet Earth right now. It is not the big food companies. It is not Nestle. It is not Unilever or General Mills or any of these other big companies. It is the individual citizen. And what we do as individuals, the way we buy our food and what we choose to buy, is probably the most powerful agent of change that we will ever have. Of course, how we farm, which is partly the discussion of this gathering. So we, meaning my organization, the Sustainable Food Trust, are thinking about that very deeply at the moment. And we are working on a report which is trying to answer a question. And the question is this: what should I eat to be sustainable and healthy? And we think this is the question that every citizen, every caring citizen on planet Earth should be asking at the moment. What should I eat? And there are so many reports that have come out in the last few years, like the Eat Lancet report and World Resources Institute, and there's dozens of them. They've all come up with diets. And there's this whole thing about moving to plant-based diets, as if it was some sort of panacea which would suddenly solve all the world's problems. And we think the thinking behind those reports and the recommendations of the Climate Change Committee, certainly the UK Climate Change Committee, but I think the IPCC as well, and the governments who are saying this kind of thing, and they're adopting what's called a land sparing policy, which is like rewild as much as possible to save nature, and then further intensify on the best land so that we can kind of have an industrial food system on the most fertile soils, and then we have lots of nature on the rest, is a fundamentally flawed approach. And we think the answer to the question, what should I eat to be healthy and sustainable, is that we should eat what the farmers in our country or in the region where we live produce when they shift to regenerative production systems. What is the answer to that question? We didn't know. So we thought, well, we will do a study in the UK, like a desk study. So we will transition all the agriculture in the UK to regenerative farming. What do we mean by regenerative farming? We mean farming in harmony with nature. We mean following the principles of the circular economy. We mean minimizing greenhouse gas emissions, avoiding pollution, promoting biodiversity to coexist with farming systems, obeying the law of return, and producing as much health promoting, which is, hang on, I've lost the video for some reason. Oh, there we are. Producing as much health-promoting food as is consistent with maintaining the natural capital, the nature's bank of soil, everything on our farm. And the answer to that question is applied on a national level, on a UK level, but we could be talking Hungary, Turkey, anywhere. We don't know the answer. So we thought we'll have a look and see what it is. And what we did was we divided the UK into about 6 different farming system zones, dependent on the fertility of the soils, the climate, the landscape, the topography. And we calculated, so we imposed those farming systems, I suppose you could say. We assumed that farmers in the region would adopt those farming systems. So the typical farming system would be a return to the avoidance of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, because that kills the soil and the nature, the adoption of practices which build soil fertility, mostly based on crop rotations, where there's a regenerative phase and a depleting phase, which would be of crops. Obviously, in the uplands and the mountains, it would be mainly grassland with grazing animals such as beef and sheep. But in the lowlands, it would be more of a mixed system. And there would be some intensive biological horticulture and fruit, etc. And then we calculated the yields which would come from those farming systems. And then we divided the total yield across the whole of the UK with the number of citizens in the UK, say 67 million, to calculate what if you made a personal commitment to the question, what should I eat to be sustainable and healthy? And you said, if you were a UK citizen, I want to have tea, coffee and bananas. But when it comes to my staple, which can never be grown in the UK unless we have terrible climate change. But when it comes to the staple foods, the fruits, the vegetables, the fresh dairy, eggs, fresh meat, grains, etc., that could be grown in the UK, we want to eat those from farming systems near to us. We wanted to know what the amount of food that we would have to eat per day or per week would be. And we're going to publish the report at the end of October in the run-up to COP26. And we think that the answers will be surprising, certainly to the climate change people who definitely don't understand agriculture, which is that, yes, we will have to eat lots more vegetables, of course, and fruit in season. And we need to have less processed grain products. We will have a lot less grain, probably about less than half what we're producing in the UK at the moment, because you cannot do arable monocultures, grain monocultures in a regenerative farming system. So that means you have lower yields because you don't use chemistry, and you have less land at any one time producing grain crops. So the result is a 50% reduction in grain, but 50% of all the grain that is produced in the UK is currently fed to intensive poultry and pigs and mega dairies. So that's the end of intensive pigs, poultry and mega dairies. We just won't have them any longer because we can't feed them, because grain is actually ecologically quite expensive to produce. It's only because of Roundup and fertilizers that it has appeared cheap. And therefore, the white meat fraction of our diet will reduce a lot, but the red meat, the grass-fed and mainly grass-fed lamb and beef and dairy products will have as much in the future as we will have today. And yes, this lies completely at odds with the Climate Change Committee and all the people who are worried about methane emissions, which we are saying should be offset by the soil carbon gain of the world's second largest carbon bank, namely the soil, managed through holistic grazing systems and systems which work in harmony with nature. So that is one of the major projects we're working on. And the other project we're working on, which I'd just like to share with you briefly, is developing what we're calling a global farm metric, which would be applicable to every farm of whatever size in the world. And actually, interestingly enough, Malawi is one of the countries we're about to trial it. We're trialing it already in the US and in Australia, and trials in the UK. And the idea is that if we had a common set of ways of measuring the impact of farming systems, it doesn't matter what you call them, regenerative, organic, biodynamic, agroecological, or intensive, we need just in the same way that we have common protocols for measuring accounting, with the profit and loss and the balance sheet. We need a common language for measuring the impact of farming systems on sustainability outcomes. So we have been working on this with a bunch of farmers and land managers for about the last 6 years. And we got together and we thought, we're all having lots of audits for our farm. I'm having 5 a year on my farm, one from the government, one from the organic certifiers, 2 from the organic certifiers actually, because one for the farm and one for the cheese, and a red tractor, which is like a baseline audit, and others. And at the end of it, I don't know whether my farming is any more sustainable than it was last year. And what I really want to know as a farmer is whether I'm building soil carbon, building biodiversity, improving the social capital, the human capital, the skills of the people that work on the farm. But I have no way of measuring those. So what we've done is we've developed a framework, which we would love to be trialed in Hungary, by the way, which would be as relevant for a smallholder farmer who was selling on local markets as it was to a large farmer, because all of us want to know what the impact of our farming system is. And at the moment, and I can say this with some authority, if you farm in a regenerative way, an organic way, you make less money than if you farm in a way which is damaging climate change, reducing biodiversity, and causing other forms of social and cultural damage. This is crazy. And in the end, if we want to change the whole world to farming systems which are rebuilding what we've lost during my farming lifetime, that system of farming must pay better than the farming systems which which are still making money at the moment. And the way to do that is a series of things. We need to apply the polluter pays principle so that farmers and farming practices which cause damage to the environment are financially accountable for that damage. Polluter pays, nitrogen, fertilizer, pesticides taxed in proportion to the damage they cause. The European Union subsidies, the Common Agricultural Policy subsidies, which are in the form of a social security payment, which you get for every acre or hectare you farm at the moment, more or less as long as you don't break the law, they need to be redirected so that the only farmers who get them are farmers who are building soil, increasing biodiversity, employing more people, building more skills. And the farmers who are causing damage don't get any subsidies at all. So that's like a carrot and a stick. The stick is the polluter pays principle. The carrot is the redirection of subsidies. And then we need to create a world where there are informed citizens who really understand what food they should buy, because they can measure it using this harmonized farming system, farm sustainability assessment, with maybe a scoring system which could be on food labels. And they don't all have to pay for an annual audit, because they could self-certify, a bit like you do with your tax return. So this would be empowering for smallholder farmers who may be selling to people they know, but they would still want to do a sustainability audit because it might help them in some way or another. And that's the work we're doing. Back on my farm, I feel now that the future of farming is to inspire the next generation of children who are growing up. And I feel that farms need to there needs to be like a global network of beacon farms, which are all connected in some sort of informal way. And they become centers of education and inspiration. And we need to have all children visiting farms, even if they live in the heart of a city during their childhood, so that they have a taste of nature. Because I grew up in London and I went on a few farm holidays when I was a child and to wild places. And I had a taste of nature. And that was what brought me into agriculture. It was those experiences when I was 5 or 6 years old and a little bit older of nature, which inspired me. And I believe that if we could plant that seed in every child when at a young age, then we would transform the future. And as has already been said, we need to make a career in agriculture, working on the land, culturally and economically, the most desirable thing that we should do when we grow up. And that at the moment it has a low status, as was said, but we can change that. So maybe that's enough for now. Maybe we can have a discussion based on some of the things I've shared. But I do believe, maybe just to say this, that we unfortunately voted, not me, voted for Brexit. And we are now, you know, a sort of rather sad country suffering from what we did. But we are all connected, as I said earlier. I think we share our common humanity. And at a time when there's so much difficulty in the world, I think people who are involved with nature and with agriculture have a special responsibility to work together in a new way. And I believe that this is the time when this can happen.
Thank you, Patrick. There is already a question, which it's actually two questions. How can you make these ideas accepted by the British public, and how can you push it through the UK government?
Okay, that's a really great question. Two great questions. On the British government, on the public front, I think the public are ready for this, and it obviously requires a big. I think we have to build an informed body of public opinion about some of the things I've been speaking about, and I think part of it is through, you know, what I just said about getting children onto farms, but not just children, people, and to develop. So on our farm, we've got now an old threshing barn, which we've converted into a place where people can come and learn. We've got loos, toilets, and a kitchen, and underfloor heating, and we've got little eco cabins where we hope people will come and stay. So we can host events which can bring people to discuss things in a farm setting. So I think farms can be educational resources like that. And I think that through social media and through getting our ideas onto a media stage with people not like me, who are seen as ambassadors for the regenerative farming movement, is really important. On a government level, I think that's a really amazingly important question. I'll just give a little brief report on where we are. I had a Zoom meeting with our Secretary of State, Minister of Agriculture. He's a man called George Eustace, last Friday. And he, to my amazement, said, we need to look at a mixed farming, regenerative farming in the lowland areas. So this is really exciting that even our minister is saying that. But of course, our prime minister, who's currently in America with Biden, he doesn't get this stuff. But on the other hand, he has a family, a father called Stanley Johnson, who's actually an environmentalist and has come to talks that I've given. And I met him at the Rio +20 conference, and I know him pretty well. He totally shares all the stuff he's the same view as that. And interestingly enough, I was at a conference in Scotland last week, and his sister, the Prime Minister's sister, Rachel Johnson, was there. And so I invited her to come to a farm meeting that we're planning next week in a rural farm in Oxfordshire. So I think we just have to be like subversive in a way and influence everyone we can possibly manage to get to and inspire them. And I think that there's like a tipping point thing happening, because governments are always the last people to act. I mean, Nestle's acting, the British government isn't, and I'm sure it's true with most governments. They don't lead, they follow. So we have to harness the power of the big food companies top down, but also individual citizens bottom up together. And if we do that all at once and we work together, we can do this, because the change that's needed has the decisive advantage that there's no alternative. If we go on as we are, we're finished as a species, and we will be a participant in the sixth great extinction.
Durukan wrote that he appreciates very much the assessment, the scenarios you have conducted for UK. And the question is whether you are considering to share or open the source of the methodology for facilitating to be done in other countries as well. You mentioned Hungary, but...
Yes, the global farm metric is not ours. We see ourselves as a catalyst to encourage the emergence of a harmonized system of farm assessment. So if any of you would like to see, receive an email with a comprehensive update on where we've got to and how we see it going forward, including the metrics themselves, completely open source, no IP, no branding. We have no aspiration to become a certification organization. We can just see that unless we find a way of measuring sustainability globally, we're not going to be able to do what is needed with transforming our food and farming systems, because agriculture is now the majority land user on planet Earth. Their farms are the lungs and the stomach of the planet. And at the moment, the patient Earth is sick. So we have to restore the patient to health. And to do that, we need to measure our health using common metrics. And I think this can happen. I think there's an appetite for it. So we'd love anybody who wants to get involved with this to participate. And we see this happening at national level, at international level, and everybody's equal.
Thank you. Other questions? Maybe to any of the three speakers?
No, I mean, sorry, it's just a follow up on the question to Patrick. I was mostly mentioning or referring to the scenarios you worked. What if you switched to regenerative agriculture in the UK and you prepared 6 different regions based on topography and climate and so on? So I was also referring to that, like how you have done that work, because it's very interesting. And I believe it has a strong PR, public relations potential to show people how it may look like.
Yeah, we need a study like that for every country and region on the planet, because obviously the diet, which would be, if you made a personal commitment, your staple foods would only be sourced from the regional country where you lived, then that diet would look different in Hungary than it would in the United Kingdom, or indeed Turkey, or anywhere else. So in a way, the methodology that we're using for this study, I think, is kind of usable, if you know what I mean, if you wanted to do one for your country. And so we'd be happy to share that. I mean, the report is going to come out soon. And there wasn't anything spectacularly kind of technical about it. We just kind of thought, right, well, what data is there out there about regenerative farming system yields? And as a regenerative farmer myself, I knew something about what was possible. So we looked at which kind of, so just to give you an example, our farm, 50% of our farm cannot grow crops because it's too steep or too wet, or the soils are too fragile. So only 50% of our farm is in a rotation, and that rotation can only consist of 2 years of cropping for whatever we grow. In our case, it's oats and peas and carrots we used to grow as well, vegetables. Then we have to go back to grass. So at any one time, only 10% of our farm is growing crops for human consumption. 90% of it is in grass. So that was one of our farming models. And we know that there's a significant area of the United Kingdom which is very similar to my farm. So we mapped that section of the land. And then there were 2 more types of land which are more flexible and can grow more biologically intensively. So we mapped that in. And then we had to work out how much wheat we would get per acre, how much carrots and everything else. But these were really broad scenario plannings that we're not getting into the detail, but we're fairly confident that the yields and the ratios of the farming systems that we've imposed on our landscape would be, you know, we think we've got some solid data. And what is surprising is how, if we did farm this way, we could be, even in a country with 67 million and a relatively small land area, we could be relatively self-sufficient. And surely that is the antidote to food insecurity. We don't want global trade where we can avoid it. Of course, there will be global trade, but only where it's necessary. The principle should be to decentralize, relocalize our food systems as much as possible.
That sounds great. Thank you, Patrick. And I will be getting in touch for cooperating on that for to start with, for Turkey at least. I think it's a great idea to prepare those kind of scenarios for really drawing the picture of how it will look like if we succeed. Let's say.
It's like we need to imagine and co-create the future that we want to step into, and this report is a small contribution to that.